can't really believe it, and it's not real until you're here and you feel it and you see it. It's crazy that people use this as their main source of water.
This is where we lived in 2012 and 13, and this brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah, this was home for a year for us in 2012, and not much has changed.
This was the first home we brought our daughter home to.
Yeah.
Layla. We have 3 beautiful children, Layla, who is our oldest, and then RJ, and our youngest, Sunny. We are from the West Texas area. We were born and raised in Lubbock and currently live in Amarillo. Eric and I met in 2010 and got married shortly after that. We knew early on in our relationship that missions was going to be a part of our life. We didn't know how that was going to look. About 2012, we'd been married about a year. We found a very distant connection here in Uganda, and we packed our bags, bought a one-way ticket, and came here to see what God had for us. We had a sense of adventure, but also felt a calling. We just didn't know why. We didn't know what that calling was. When we first moved here, I started teaching at a local elementary school. Eric was doing some preaching in local churches and going out in villages. I wouldn't say either of us felt like that's why we were called here. We spent probably the first 3 months of our time here doing what we could. At the same time, I felt like I was keeping the people of Uganda at a distance. I had been on short-term trips before where I easily fall in love with the culture and the people, and I think I was scared if I did that here that I wouldn't leave, that I wouldn't go home, and a big part of me wanted to go home. About 3 months into our time here, a group from a short-term trip was going to pray at the local hospital, and they asked if I wanted to go. And usually that would scare me. Like I said, I was keeping people at a distance, but I decided to just start saying yes to things that popped up. So I went to the hospital with this group. I thought I knew what to expect. I had driven by the hospital. I had seen it. It looked rough. But going into the doors, it was jarring. There were people laying on the floors because there weren't mattresses on the bed. The mattresses that were there were soiled in I don't know what. There was chickens roaming around. It was a shock, to say the least. I couldn't believe that this is where people were going to get medical attention. And so we went around, we prayed for people in the most vulnerable state. And the last place we went to in the hospital was the children's ward. There was a little girl sick. I didn't know what was wrong because of the language barrier, but she was sick. They did tell me she had a fever. And we were praying over her. There was probably 5 of us around her bed. I remember I had my hand on her foot praying for her. Her mom was up by her head. And then there was a lot of commotion. I didn't know what was happening, but I quickly realized she died as we were praying over her. I found out later she died of her fever. Her fever killed her because the hospital didn't have medication to treat a fever. I had medication at my home that could have helped her more than that hospital could. And in that moment, I walked home. There was nothing else to do in that moment. And I told Eric what I saw. And I said, I don't know what we can do, but we have to help that hospital before we leave here. That is why we're here.
Kimberly came back from the hospital that day, and it was definitely a different feeling from her. She was pretty shocked, and she was just urgent that something needed to happen and that we had to figure out what to do at that hospital. Again, we didn't know what that was yet. In her heart, she knew that something had to happen, something had to change.
So I got the phone number of the head doctor at that hospital, called him. His name is Dr. Jackson Sichikubu. I didn't know him at this time. I now know that he was the biggest blessing to this ministry. To say that he was a godsend would be an understatement. He is a doctor. He got his degree in the States, and then he came back to Uganda. He came here to serve his community, use his education to serve his community here, and he oversees all of our water wells. But at that moment, we didn't know him. I called him to meet up. We were meeting him for the first time. It's funny looking back now to realize like that meeting him changed everything. I went in thinking we'll buy mattresses for the hospital or medicine, and I started telling Jackson these things. We can buy y'all mattresses, and he just kind of smiled and he's like, that's great if that's what you really want to do, but what this hospital needs is water. I knew the hospital was in bad shape, but to realize that a medical facility didn't even have water, no wonder it was as filthy as it was, that there was chickens roaming around because there was no water, and they were spending all their money on water. So they couldn't buy medication, they couldn't buy mattresses because every dime they made went to water. I'm thinking, I know nothing about water wells. I have a degree in education. Eric had a degree in business. We don't know how to do that. I quickly realized that Jackson had been thinking about this for 20 years. He knew what needed to be done. And he told me there's a spring of water about 2 miles down that collects rainwater. He said, we can put a pump in there, filter this water, and pump it up to the hospital. That's where it all started. We didn't know what would come of it. We reached out to everyone we knew back home. We told them what I had seen. We told them what the hospital needed. And by the end of our year here, that hospital had water for the first time in 20 years. We didn't go into that thinking this was going to be our lifelong ministry. It was just we wanted to make an impact in that year that we were here. And after that well was finished, after we moved back home, we couldn't forget about it. Our focus is here. We stayed in contact with Dr. Jackson. He is very connected throughout this community, and he would say, hey, here's this village in dire need of water. And we would fundraise for that one well. And it would take a year or two to raise money for one well. But we would make it happen, and we would see the impact there. And so say, let's do another one, and it just snowballed. And one day we looked up and thought, we need to make this official. We need to make a nonprofit organization that does this, and that's where we are now.
We come every year. We check on our water wells that have been drilled and come see our friends and the people here. And so every year we come back, and there's excitement and nervousness. The trips are long days and a lot of work, but that is so outweighed by the joy that you feel the entire time you're here with the people and the culture, and we leave here much better people than when we come. Almost half of Uganda doesn't have access to clean water, water that they can use to drink and cook with and bathe. It's a massive problem. It is an urgent and a massive problem. But the change we are making with each water well is also massive. these kids in these villages have never been to school. The adults in these villages have never been to school. It's because they don't have water. It's the kids who on a daily basis are walking miles at a time and going just to carry water back and forth, and so they never have a chance to get educated. They don't have even the opportunity to be a kid, and for those villages, it is changing them for generations. So when people donate to 2535 Water, 100% of those donations go to Uganda. We have a few amazing people who they cover all of the overhead costs of the ministry and what we do. And so when people donate to Water Wells, that's where their money's going. Everything else is on a volunteer basis. That money does not stay in America. It comes to Uganda. It employs Ugandans, and it provides water for people.
I sometimes want to find that mom and let her know that her daughter's death wasn't for nothing. I mean, I have no way of finding her. I don't know who she was, but I hope somehow she knows that that moment changed me. It influenced a lot. I know sometimes we feel disconnected, like we know that there's a water crisis, but there's something different about seeing it, and you really are making a difference.